My name is Caroline McCaffrey-Howarth, and as always, myself and Felix Zorzo, members of the French Porcelain Society Committee, are delighted to welcome you on behalf of us all joining us this evening for our first autumnal return to the Living Room Lectures. And we are really delighted to be joined by actually 4 speakers today, a wonderful curator, Hélène Bremer, and 3 contemporary ceramics artists, Matt Smith, Amy Jane Hughes and Kate O'Kelly, who'll be speaking to us about a really exciting exhibition taking place at the moment in Dublin for the Love of the Master, which is celebrating the tercentenary of Piranesi's birth. So we'll be hearing all about the exhibition from Hélène and then passing on to hear more about the individual responses that these fantastic contemporary artists have made in porcelain, in ceramics, to Piranesi, the impact of him today, which is really exciting. As always, we'll have time for a Q&A at the very end. So if you have any questions, you can write those in the chat box, which you should be able to see on the bottom hand of your screen, and we'll get to them towards the end of our talk. But without any further ado, it's my real pleasure to welcome first and foremost the curator and main speaker this evening of Piranesi and Porcelain, Hélène Bremer, who is a Dutch art historian and curator. She specialises in presenting exhibitions with contemporary art in historic houses and castles throughout Europe, and her practice is focused on transhistoric curating, really interested in connecting the present with the past, heritage objects with new artworks. Her background as an art historian specialised in the art and culture of the 18th century is very much linked with her personal passion for collecting contemporary ceramics inspired by the 18th century. And I think this is really visible in her curatorial work and especially in the Piranesi show as well. Exhibitions that she has curated include Suite 18 in Belgium in 2015, Armed with Beauty for Amsterdam Castle in the Netherlands in 2018, On a Pedestal, celebrating the contemporary portrait bust in the 21st century for Dublin Castle, and of course the exhibition that we'll be focusing on this evening for the Love of the Master, 25 artists fascinated by Piranesi, Casino at Marino and Coach House Gallery at Dublin Castle. So over to you, and thank you all so much for coming. Enjoy.
Thank you, Caroline, for this introduction. And thank you, I have to say, especially to Patricia Ferguson, who had the idea to ask me, to invite me to present the exhibition for the Love of the Master in this series of Living Room Lectures. It is a great pleasure to talk about the Piranesi exhibition before such a distinguished group of connoisseurs of porcelain as the members of the French Porcelain Society. I must admit that I would not feel at ease talking about historical porcelain, as I'm just an admirer and not a scholar. Therefore, I'm glad I can talk to you about contemporary porcelain, which already Caroline said is one of my passions. I can't say all the pieces we will discuss today are in porcelain. We will also discuss earthenware, stoneware, and bone china. But I thought Piranesi porcelain sounded better than Piranesi ceramics. What I will do this afternoon is talk about the ideas behind the Piranesi exhibition and where the concept originated from. Then I'll talk about the process of selecting the artists and why we included ceramics. And after that, I'll introduce the 3 of the artists you already met now, who participated in the show, and I want to discuss their experience working with the master Piranesi as a source of inspiration. We will then hopefully have time left to respond to some of your questions. Now I have to see if my slide is working. Yes. This image shows almost literally my fascination for Piranesi and the versatility of his talents. Piranesi was an architect, etcher, engraver, designer, archaeologist, and theorist. In the same time, you see me standing in front of a contemporary work by artist Emily Allchurch, who interpreted Piranesi's architectural fantasies with 21st century views. In my work, this juxtaposition of the historical and the contemporary is leading, a fascination I share with my co-curator, Mary Heffernan, who you can see here looking at a binding of prints by Piranesi. The book is called the Antiquità Romane, which we were able to lend for the exhibition from the Arma Robinson Library. For us, but as we know now as well, to lots of the visitors in the exhibition, it is very interesting to being able to see the original 18th century works together with the contemporary interpretations of it. Mary and I both share the interest of showing contemporary art in historic houses, which make me leap to the next slide, in which you see the casino at Marino and a happy bunch of people who produced the exhibition. The casino was built by Sir William Chambers for Lord Charlemont as a temple of the arts. And this is exactly why we all look so happy in this image of the team that made the exhibition possible. We brought the building, after a wonderful refurbishment, back to being a temple of the arts again in the 21st century. Why this building, this casino? The casino at Marino represents the link between Piranesi and Ireland, or better said, the link between Piranesi and Lord Charlemont. When James Caulfield, first Earl of Charlemont, went on his grand tour, he met Piranesi in Rome in 1749. They became friends, and Charlemont became the patron of Piranesi's groundbreaking work on the ancient buildings of Rome and their decorative detail. The relationship between the two men ended with a public fallout. To cut a long story short, Piranesi worked for years on the publication, and in the time, Lord Charlemont lost interest in the patronage. Piranesi was furious and wrote letters where he demanded payment and recognition. He even published a pamphlet to justify his anger, which is known as the Lettera di Giustificazione, of which an original copy is now in the exhibition on loan from the National Library in Ireland. Lord Charlemont, however, did keep his love for everything Italian and developed a domain that one might call a piece of Italy in Dublin. The Casino Marino was at the center of admiration of the classical architecture so much admired by Charlemont. This neoclassical gem has survived and is internationally regarded as a building of exquisite craftsmanship and great architectural significance, and the perfect place for our exhibition. Why is the other castle in the image? It represents the start of my own fascination for Piranesi. The castle is called Biljum and is situated in Velp, near Arnhem in the Netherlands, just 5 kilometers from where I live. What is here the link with Piranesi? Let's have a look inside the castle. In the main hall or central ballroom of the castle, its 18th century owner, the Baron van Spaan van Biljum, created his little piece of Rome after his grand tour in 1770. A collector of souvenirs, he bought several prints in Piranesi's workshop. When redecorating his castle a decade later, he presented these prints to a stucco worker, a German who learned stucco work in Italy. He used them as a model to copy views of Rome in stucco work, as you can see here in one of the overdoors. My research into the history of this room led me to think about craftsmanship over the centuries, and next to that, about using Piranesi prints as a model, or even better, as inspiration for artists in the 21st century. The necklace, made by Evert Nijland, stems from the first ideas in that direction and combined also my love of ceramics. The porcelain beds are covered with details of decoration that can also be found on Piranesi prints. The piece is in the exhibition and wonderfully presented at the Casino Marino. How did the exhibition came about in Dublin? Well, you can understand that Mary and I bonded, and one thing led to another. And in 2016, we discussed our first ideas about an exhibition of presenting works inspired by Piranesi for the 300th birthday in 2020. For reasons you all know, the exhibition was postponed, and we are really, really happy that it went on ahead this year. To talk about the selection process of the artworks, here you can see an overview of some of the artists involved in the exhibition. But we decided to select works that were made by artists who were already involved with Piranesi as an inspiration. But also we would like to ask artists to make new work. So we approached artists as well, who were to respond to the prints by Piranesi, who had never seen Piranesi prints before. The response was overwhelming, and we were happy to find a second venue to present the exhibition next to the Casino at Marino in the Coach House Gallery at Dublin Castle. This also gave us the opportunity to show original works by Piranesi because of the conditions that are difficult in historic houses sometimes, and here the conditions were very good, and we were very lucky to have the volumes of the Antiquità Romana from the Armand Robinson Library in the exhibition. Here you can see them placed in special vitrines next to the works that were inspired by it. Why did we select ceramic work? Another influential publication by Piranesi called Vases, Candelabra, Gravestones, Sarcophagi, Tripods, Lamps and Ornaments, designed and etched by Giovanni Piranesi. I do say it in English because my Italian is not that good to say it. I triple over English already. It is also a rich source of inspiration for the decorative arts and a large part of the fame of Piranesi's work. We've therefore selected works by artists that make vase-shaped pieces to join the show. In this image, you can see a glimpse of the work of Gareth Neal and Michael Eden, both working in 3D techniques. But there are also vases in glass and textile. In order to present the variety in materials and works, we've asked the help of two scenographers. The screens, of which you see an example here, are part of the scenography imaginatively designed by Caroline Voet and Leen de Brabander, both architects from Antwerp. And it's on purpose that we asked architects to do the scenography, just as Piranesi was an architect himself. Their design is on the one hand based on the plan of the Casino Marino and on the other hand on the Italian landscape, much admired by the Grand Tour travelers that inspired them to recreate their piece of the classical landscape once they were back in their respective Northern European countries. But I already arrive at the part that you may be most interested in, the ceramic works and the artists who made new work for this exhibition. I'll leave it to them already to introduce their work and elaborate on the inspiration Piranesi gave them. And first, I'd like to introduce Matt Smith, who doesn't need much introduction probably. His involvement in the process of the exhibition is more than being one of the 25 artists participating in it, I have to say. Matt, next to being an artist and educator, is also a curator. And he was part of the team with me and Mary Heffernan that selected the artists and artworks for the show. Well, I will ask him now to tell something about his work made for the exhibition and his fascination for Piranesi. Matt, please tell us about this series of 3 works.
Yeah, of course. Hi, thanks, Hélène, and good evening, everybody. Firstly, just talk about the curating slightly. It was an absolute pleasure to be invited in by Hélène and Mary. And I think as soon as, I'm not a Piranesi expert by any means, so I had to do a bit of book learning and reading. And I think Hélène talks about this in the catalogue quite well, that we're so aware of Piranesi, even if we're not aware of him, and how much he's influenced artists, both historic and contemporary, whether we realize that or not. So there was a huge amount of learning for me to do, and realizing how influenced I was by him, whether I knew it or not. And one of the joys of these group exhibitions is with 25 artists, you're all going to come at the same subject from different directions. So for once, I didn't feel I had to have a real insight into the politics of Piranesi. I could play a lot more with the aesthetics, and with somebody like Piranesi, who's produced so much work, you can kind of start anywhere, you can go anywhere, and as a ceramicist, that's a real joy. And so what I was really interested in doing was trying to work with an aesthetic response to the Piranesi prints. And I think one of the first things to get across is I was interested in these prints are black and white, and I was conscious that the originals would have been viewed in candlelight. So when it came to me coming with a colorway, this is going to be a very aesthetic talk, sorry about that. When it came to looking at colors to work with, it became obvious to me I wanted to work in a monochrome, in black and white, but I wanted a bit of gilding in there, just to spark candlelight, to spark light bouncing off. And I wanted to think of these as objects that would be seen in candlelight and play with that. So as we're in a ceramics or porcelain talk, let's start with the basics. They're white earthenware. Two of them are thrown, one of them is cast, and then they have additions. Some of them are press molded, some of them are slick cast additions. And I kind of just threw all of my ceramic making knowledge at these. It was, what did Piranesi bring? What could I take from him aesthetically? And what did I have in the studio? And what objects could I cast from that in some way mirrored images or motifs I could see coming through in Piranesi's work? And I'm not somebody who throws that often. So for me, this was a real going back to the wheel and a real joyful thing to be playing with. What I got from reading about Piranesi that I didn't realize, and maybe you wouldn't get just by looking at it, that he documented these archaeological fragments and these views of the antique, but he also pulled stuff together and created new objects from various fragments. And as a ceramicist who works with assembly and collage and bricolage, I mean, I felt we were firm bedfellows on this. And almost what I kept coming back to is how we look at these Piranesi prints as a record of the antique, but in a way they're a record of Piranesi's fantasy of what the antique might be. And this kind of, even though I was trying to stick just to aesthetics, I became more and more interested in how history becomes this fantasy that it's devised, it's created. Piranesi created these fantasies of history that we now believe are somehow more historically accurate than they possibly were at the time. So kind of summarizing in a slightly circuitous way, what I was particularly interested in is, even though these are vessels that two of them could hold liquid, I guess, two of them have lids, they're not functional. They're never going to be functional. And I was interested in coming back to Piranesi's interest in follies, and whether these could be seen as domestic follies that are there for pleasure and enjoyment, but not really to do anything that useful in life, other than to be something to consider and be playful in an interior environment. Did that make any? That was quite circuitous. I hope that was okay, Hélène.
Yeah, it's very, very good. I just forgot to slip through the slides to show you the ones you used as reference, probably.
And this is what I really loved about Piranesi. Say that the boar's head, I knew I had probably a 1970s ceramic piece that I'd found and could cast from that mirrored this shape of the boar's head. And it almost in a way with the Piranesi prints, it was like seeing family photographs of images or forms or shapes that were familiar, maybe not from the antique, maybe from the 50s or the 70s or the 1880s, but this kind of how much we see similar motifs and forms coming through in design and the decorative arts repeatedly over time. And that was, I found that really comforting and quite, yeah, reassuring that these motifs we keep coming back to.
Yes. Shall we pass on the word to the next artist? We probably will be back with you again later, Matt. I would like to give the floor to Kate. Kate O'Kelly is an Irish artist whose architectural forms I admired, hence the idea of approaching her to be involved in the exhibition. And I hope you don't mind telling me this anecdote, Kate, when we first talked about this, that you said, well, you know, actually, I don't know Piranesi and I've actually never heard of him. But maybe you can take us through how you got to know him and tell something about what he is still doing for you in your practice.
Absolutely. Thank you, Hélène. Yes, it's very true. I had not come across Piranesi as an artist, but I suppose I have a sort of a personal connection to Italy, having had an aunt who was also an artist who lived there and would have spent quite a lot of time. So it was no surprise. There was a beautiful Piranesi book of the etchings in my mother's house that I was able to kind of pour into when I got the invitation for this. And I have to say, I was really excited straight away. I think what struck me about Piranesi and about his work was his inventiveness and his imagination. You can see it in, I suppose, his drawings, his designs, the way he would borrow and take elements from different eras and from different sort of styles and fuse them together to create his own sort of visual language. I think that's what first drew me into the world of Piranesi. Because I felt, again, a bit of, as Matt was saying, someone who works with assemblage and molds and casting, and that I felt I had something in common with Piranesi. So that was lovely to start with. Again, as well, I thought it was fascinating that he had sort of created these fake artifacts, particularly the candelabras, which I read that he it was written that he was rummaging around in Hadrian's villa near Tivoli, and in the mud came across these kind of fragments and recreated these artifacts, which for a long time were believed to be true. And then it was realized that actually they belonged to something else. And again, this idea of him kind of rummaging around and being a collector and a hoarder and a bit of a magpie is something I can absolutely relate to in my practice. I've often used found objects that I've collected. Through college days, I was very close to a street in Dublin, if anyone knows it, Francis Street, where there was a lot of antique shops, and I would go in and collect objects that had a sort of a personal resonance to me or that I felt were evocative, and bring them into the ceramic studio and cast from them. So that was one of the first things I did was go into the studio and, like Matt, have a look around. I knew I had a lot of objects that I thought I could bring into this exhibition. And then I suppose I think another admiration I had for Piranesi was his technical inquiry and this idea of him being an inventor. Again, something I relate to in my own practice is I'm really interested in process and finding new ways of making. So for this exhibition, I worked with both casting, so casting from found objects and slip casting in porcelain, but also brought in another process I'd been working with, which was extruding and creating my own really nice laser cut extruding die. So here I was looking at the idea of profiles, and the images on the bottom left, you can see some of these twisted pieces that I created with the extruder and the profiles. And that was a really lovely visceral way of, I think, responding to the prints as well, and that sort of sense of turmoil and twisting that I could see in a lot of Piranesi's work. Quite different from the image on the top left, which were just slip cast pieces. So I think while working on this exhibition, it definitely really developed my practice, and that was, you know, fantastic experience. All you could want for as an artist when you're given a brief or proposal, for it to kind of spark new ideas in that way. So a huge thank you for including me in this, Helena.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I think I've kind of.
I just wanted to maybe, it's interesting to say that when we came back to you to say that the exhibition would go on this year, that you said, well, you know, the work that I intended for the exhibition, yes, of course we can present it, but in the meantime, in the past 2 years, I have been kind of working further, and I have a bit of a different piece of a series of works. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that, because
Sure,
I think the pandemic also had an influence on this.
Yeah, I think it definitely did. I think the works I proposed at the start, and there's some of them included in the exhibition, was titled Fictitious Archive, and that was kind of responding or paying homage to the idea of Piranesi making these kind of fake artifacts. But then as the years, you know, the show was stalled and I was getting into the studio in kind of dribs and drabs, and that was partly because of closures with the pandemic. And I'd started working with the twisting pieces, and I think in a way it was a bit of a release and a bit of a reflection of the turmoil that was going on in the outside world. So, but it was again a new process. So it was very enjoyable for me to kind of jump into that. And that was the newer series of works which are also shown. So which I titled Fragments from an Imaginary Landscape, and I was started to combine the twisted pieces with some of the little slip cast porcelain as well. So yeah, the work did continue to develop, and it's something I would like to work with further in my practice. So I stuck to kind of, you know, the white of the porcelain mostly, with just a very sort of matte grey glaze on some of the pieces. But I wanted to stick to the white for this exhibition, just to highlight the contrast, the light and contrast, again, another element of Piranesi's work. But I think colour is something I'd love to explore in some of these pieces in the future. So I have lots of ideas brimming from this body of work, which is really nice to move forward with. Okay,
thanks. That will give me another idea about another exhibition on Piranesi, probably, and ceramics. Going on to our last artist who is involved here, and to introduce Amy Hughes, I took a passage from her website that explains completely why I thought she should look at Piranesi's vases to include in the exhibition. I quote here: "Amy has a fascination with vases, largely fueled by the 18th century, resulting in collections which aim to bridge the gap between the past and the present, finding a new home in contemporary culture for such objects, whilst paying homage to and referencing the originals." Hope you can add something to that regarding to your work in this show.
No, I'm done. Thank you, Hélène. Good evening, everybody. It was actually really interesting to hear Matt and Kate talking about the pieces, because I think we all cross over and have found like similar fascinations and things that we've wanted to work on. My pieces are called Omaggio, excuse the pronunciation, but just all mean it afterwards. So it's the 3 vases, one in porcelain, one in black stoneware, and one in a grey grog stoneware. A bit like Matt, I'd actually been fascinated with Piranesi's vase etchings for many years, but I probably, if I was honest, didn't know it was Piranesi and quite the depth of everything else that he has done as well. I often use them as a source of inspiration. I just find them quite captivating. I love his concept of ornament, his inventiveness, his exaggerated everything, maximalist style. As Kate and Matt both said as well, I also really enjoy his sort of nature of pastiche and like his artistic freedom of borrowing from different times and styles and combining together to make new pieces, as Hélène said, which is quite core to my practice of learning from the old to try and make new. And these are like all these etchings are just an endless source of inspiration for me. I'm particularly interested in form and decoration, and the nature of this being so highly decorative. Just gets me really rather excited about this. some of the work is quite similar to my sort of usual practice, and some again is quite different. When Helen first mentioned about the exhibition, I sort of jumped at the chance of an idea to make a new body of work, and as Matt said, it's so exciting as a ceramicist to try something new and possibly something you've not explored before. I would say the body of work that I made is similar in thinking, as Helen mentioned as well, been like fueled by fascination for all things 18th century. In my practice, I love to explore the footed vase as a carrier of ideas all around form and decoration. So for me, I knew exactly what sort of direction I was going to go in, but I didn't know how it was going to sort of come about. The approach in which I made the pieces was very different for me, in that these pieces are much more sculptural and architectural for me, and also working on quite a large scale. At the time when I made the pieces, the porcelain one on the left was probably quite a technical feat for me as well, if you know a madam porcelain can be and its shrinkage. So I also really enjoyed the challenge. Actually really interesting to hear Matt say, and Kate as well, about the palette. I do enjoy quite a lot of colour, and I wanted to keep these monochrome, so black, white, grey. I thought about the idea of candlelight, and I wanted shadows, and I didn't realise the exhibition would be quite lit like this, but it was amazing just because it made everything so much more dramatic. I didn't want the pieces to be glazed. I wanted the clay body to just be as enough decoration for itself and have a richness about it. Each of the pieces was exploring different elements of the form and decoration. I wanted to explore and exaggerate ornament, so much so that it was almost taking over the pieces, like coming up down the base, up over the rim, something which was so much fun to do. And also came with an element of risk. The black piece in the back, I think, was that the third or fourth time I might have made it. I wasn't happy with it. But you know, we like these challenges. Yeah, it was a fantastic opportunity to make a new body of work about Piranesi, something you know, such a source of inspiration. I consult you know, every time I come into the studio and find something new within the etchings that I'm, you know, desperate to sort of get stuck into. And again, much like the other artists, it has led to changes in my practice and like further bodies of work since. It was amazing to see these pieces in situ, and then in the Coach House Gallery with the other artists, and of course with the prints on loan. But already I was thinking, oh, if I was to make them now, I'd like to do this and I'd like to do this. So hopefully, yeah, it's definitely fueled my practice, and will keep doing so. It's probably one of the favourite exhibitions I've actually ever been involved with, from the curation, just you know, the opportunity, and then seeing it in situ and the relation to Dublin and Casino Marino was just yeah, felt very quite privileged. So yeah, thank you for asking me.
You make me blush. Thank you. I think what I would like to do is to just see whether there are questions from you out there. Caroline, can you before I may have some questions, or maybe even the artists would like to discuss between themselves, but maybe first there are questions from the participants.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, can I just say, first of all, a huge congratulations to you all. I mean, there's so much just from hearing you speak and introduce the entire concept. And I mean, getting the original from Arma is such, I mean, what a wonderful contribution to the exhibition to have that there. And then actually going out and seeking artists who maybe aren't so much thinking about Piranesi directly, but clearly have influenced your work for all three of you in really fantastic and, you know, really poignant ways. And I think, Matt, it really struck me how you sort of talked about not realizing quite how much was Piranesi that has been Piranesi influencing what you've been working with, and the kind of the familiarity of that type of decorative vocabulary that, as you say, does repeat quite often in decorative arts. I think that's just so interesting. And I just wonder if I can indulge you all with my own question, which is, do you all think that actually now, maybe moving forward, there's something about Piranesi that might underpin your work, each of you individually, that you might take with you that maybe, you know, you didn't have so much or didn't think about as consciously beforehand. Just really interested in that. Whoever would love to jump in, I'd love to hear.
Can I start off?
Yeah, absolutely.
For me, one of the real joys of Piranesi is realizing that just the breadth that somebody can have, going from the very decorative work right over to his dungeon or prison series that are incredibly dark, and that as a creative, you don't have to have one house style, that it can just be a process and an investigation that can take you in different places at different times in your career. To me, felt like a real lightness that there are these opportunities to develop, but also I really loved the Lord Chalmont and Casino Marino and this relationship he had with Piranesi, where depending on who you read, was either Lord Chalmont was a cad who offered money and then ran away, or he was stalked by Piranesi, who was running after him for cash all the time. These relationships between collectors and patrons and artists, they haven't changed that much in 300 or 400 years, and almost just how cyclical life is. That it's kind of, I find it incredibly comforting that the same things just keep coming around and around. So that for me was real joy working on the show.
Kate or Amy? I would I'm not trying to agree with Matt on everything, but he's quite knowledgeable, you know. It felt very refreshing in that I like to, in my practice, work in lots of different ways, whether it be illustration or making physical objects. So there's quite a 2D and 3D, well, always a 2D and 3D link. And sometimes I feel a bit like I'm supposed to just do one, and if I do something else, it can confuse as to what my practice is and what I'm trying to do. But actually, I'm interested in all of it, and I often in my ceramic work make lots of different bodies of work because I'm interested in lots of different eras, but they're all about the same sort of thinking. So it's all about form and decoration, dialogues between the two, historic and the contemporary. So I also felt a bit refreshed that I can do this, and also like when we went on the fascinating tour of Casino Marino, it's like when Piranesi's bad mouthing Lord Charlemagne and publishing things, it's like this is like Twitter and Instagram and social media now, and all the galleries did this and the artists did this, and you're like, it was like, well, they've just changed the perhaps channels of communication, but it's exactly the same world that we still work in.
Will I go ahead? Yeah. So I think for me actually it was really nice. It was a sort of a step back to some earlier work I'd done maybe for my degree in MA show, and then I'd gone off on a bit of a technical mission in terms of making. So this sort of brought me back to, I suppose, something in the essence of my making, which was again about the gathering, collecting these evocative objects. So I think in that way, it going forward, it's reminded me to touch base with that again, but also like Matt and like Amy, the freedom to say, oh, I'm going to make something completely different, or I'm going to be really explorative and experimental in my practice and see what comes from that, to keep that going as well, because I think you can kind of get locked into this is what I make, this is what I do, so it was a really good energizer for that, to be reminded of that. Absolutely.
Yeah, to kind of take you out and look at things from slightly different perspective, and also kind of enter into this world of fantasy in many ways, which Piranesi himself is doing. And I particularly loved, Kate, how you were talking about actually going and actually collecting objects from antique stores and curiosity shops and then casting directly from them. And I mean, that made me think straight away of Piranesi himself as a dealer, kind of the interaction of these artworks and how they were being sold and disseminated across Europe and into Ireland at that point. And as you all are saying, it all resonates so much with what still happens today, which is really interesting. We've had a couple of questions come through. First of all, one for you, Amy, asking, you mentioned with the larger the black vase that you had quite a few technical complications with that. I think you said it was several kind of goes to get it perfectly correct. Could you elaborate on those and maybe say a bit how you kind of overcame them for the final version of your piece?
I'm probably not supposed to say that I actually made the piece several times, but it just shows that, you know, not happy first time. Technically, I don't know if is it Malta? If you've worked with the black before, it's a very, very grogged body, and it is very tricky to glaze. And I often like to leave the exterior unglazed, but glaze the interior. The first piece I made, actually very happy with, but all the glaze on the interior bubbled, and it was awful and unacceptable. I also then revisiting the form, it was the first time I'd made new press molds to construct the pieces, a bit like the other guys were talking about how you sort of the assemblage of things. So I didn't actually know how the decoration was going to be, whether I needed to start it at the top and work to the bottom, whether I need to start at the bottom, work up, and whether they were going to be in a line or quite sort of random. So that took quite a bit of figuring out. The second attempt, I got too carried away, and as you imagine, or you know, the weight of a footed vase, it's, you know, all on a very thin base, and it kind of likes to do this. It liked to do it so much so that it just flopped straight off before I even put it in the kiln. So third attempt, I reconstructed, reclaimed the clay, assembled like the press molds on the piece, but it didn't have a rhythm. So my work's about the relationship with form and decoration, and it just felt a bit stale. It didn't work properly. So scrap that one. So the fourth time, it's not third time lucky, it's fourth time lucky. I moved some of the decoration to be around the skirt at the bottom of the piece, and it just seemed to then I'd grown confident at using this technique. It wasn't something I build a lot of vases, but I hadn't actually done this kind of type of decoration before, and the piece just sort of built itself. It's quite tricky, just the press molds, just the weight it adds, but then also there's quite a risk of using so much press extra clay that you might still get air bubbles and explosions and that type of thing. But it worked out fine, I think.
Just to say that I'm really glad I didn't know all about this, because I would have been so worried.
It's character building for us, honest.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think it's just so wonderful to hear about the organic kind of nature of the process. And, you know, we all have to remember clay is just such a volatile material. Oh, and if it makes you feel any better, Joe Taylor's written in the chat saying, have total empathy with your technical issues, Amy. So you're not alone.
Thanks, Joe.
Matt is actually nodding, as is Kate. Brilliant. We've had a couple of questions come through about colour, and I think what really struck me is the fact that you all sort of ended up on this kind of quite monochromatic colour palette. And we've had one which is talking about the fact that Piranesi was very influential on early 19th century artists, in particular Turner, and apparently John Soane as a collector and his interaction with Turner really looked at kind of Piranesi's engravings and ideas of light and dark and thought about that quite a lot. And we've had another question asking about why monochromatic surfaces became so important when actually we think about Piranesi's prints imitating antiquity, which wasn't actually, you know, in black and white, which was, you know, polychrome, shiny, gold and silver. So those are two slightly different comments on colour, but I think perhaps do have resonance with all three of your works, actually. Whoever'd like to jump in on that.
Just to say that we were all, in the beginning, when we were selecting the works, all focused on black and white, because for me also Piranesi was black and white prints and reassembled marble, which was all white in the 18th century, and because it was the ideal color in the 18th century also for sculpture. We did actually put in a lot of color, but not in the ceramics actually in the exhibition. So there is a glass piece which is like bursting with color in the same space as the black and white porcelain. But you know, it is true. And actually, with the scenography that we chose for, which is all making it quiet, dark, and also working with the shades and the lighting, which is perfectly done. It's especially at the Coach House Gallery. It emphasizes the black and white aspect of Piranesi's work, but it was not on purpose, but and we did try, but not with ceramics.
Could I jump in? It's a really great point that Piranesi was documenting objects that would have been coloured. But what I was interested in was not what Piranesi was copying, but what Piranesi left us with. And for me, that is black and white, or images in black and white or in grayscale. And I think almost if I was to come back to this project again, what I'm interested in is how much it is about line, and whether I take an even more graphic approach or work with line even more in the works. And maybe I regret not doing that, but you kind of almost, you need time after making something to sit back and reflect on it and come back to it. But if I could, I'd just like to pick up on what Hélène said about the scenography or the design of the exhibition. And as an artist, when you get asked to come into a show, you never know what the show's really going to look like. And now and again, you get into a show and you come and you see your work, and it feels like you've been upgraded. You've been asked to turn left on the plane. And this was one of those shows that if anyone gets the chance to see them, that almost the complete composite of the exhibition is an artwork in itself. And the curators very much haven't just left it to the artworks to do all the work. They've worked as creators themselves, and that it's just a joy as an artist to feel that your work has been elevated even further by the hard work of the people doing the exhibition. So a big thank you to Hélène.
That's really, really lovely to hear. And I feel like maybe we can repeat this at the end, but when is the exhibition actually on until? It would be really useful.
Just for another week.
Oh.
Unless someone wants to take it. But it's just, we can't keep it there.
And Ireland, no, of course. And actually just on that, we have had a question come through asking if you can show again the photograph of you with the Piranesi architecture. Is that one of, I think that was
the
one
first
of your
one,
images.
I think Emily Allchurch's work.
Yes.
Must be this one, yeah.
Yeah, so is that in the show then?
That is in the show, and it's one of 3 pieces in the show by Emily Allchurch, who also actually wouldn't surprise you probably that she had an exhibition at the Johnstone Museum with her work as well, because you can just see it hanging there. Yeah, these are the capriccios. She really worked on the architecture and Piranesi as an architect and as a creator of images, imaginary images of the classical Rome with the contemporary Rome of his time. And Emily chose to add work, contemporary from the 21st century images in yeah, it is almost a Piranesi print, isn't it? Yeah.
Brilliant. We've had another question come through, this time from Becky Wallace, specifically from Matt. She asks, the fact that your artworks take on multiple media forms, do you think Piranesi might now start to influence your wider work outside, dare I say, outside of ceramics within the FPS confines of this evening? But it is an interesting question in terms of these specific commissions of exhibitions and how that influences your entire approach, I suppose.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question, Becky. Yeah, I don't know. I think almost Kate was talking about having casts that she uses, and I kind of feel that ideas and knowledge of art or decorative history is a bit like that. You have these things that either in your mind or in your studio that you go and you pull from when you get a new challenge or a new opportunity. And so I don't think I've ever had an investigation or a new body of work or a new piece being made for an exhibition that hasn't led on somewhere in some way. It's almost, it's really hard to know moving forward how something like Piranesi will influence in the future. But I can't imagine I'm not going to come back to him in some way or another. Yeah, it's kind of waiting for those connections to be right.
Kate and Amy, I assume that would be the same for both of you then, with your work.
Kate, do you want to go? Oh.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I think it has definitely spurred a new technical inquiry for me in the studio, which is great. So, you know, I do see that continuing. And I think it will be a further source of reference, you know, the work of Piranesi, certainly for me in the work. Was there a question about other materials there, or was that specifically for Matt? Or
I think it was, I mean, that was specifically, I think, Matt working outside of ceramics.
Outside of ceramics, that's what it was. Yes, sorry. Okay, but yeah, so just in terms of me for the practice, yeah, I think it will definitely be a further inspiration. Would be
brilliant. And I'm just really aware of time. Hélène, I don't know if you had any other questions you wanted to pose to the artists. I think we've got one final one from the audience, and then we could maybe.
Okay, yeah, well, just when I point you to the quote that I put on the slide, saying that Piranesi said that if I need to produce great ideas, and I believe that if I were commissioned to design a new universe, I would be mad enough to undertake it. I would be mad enough to make another Piranesi exhibition, and by hearing what you all said, you probably will agree with that. But if you want to kind of say, no way, no more Piranesi, then please let me know.
I love that. It could do lots of different themes. And actually, Mia Jackson has just written in the chat as well that at Waddesdon, of course, they have a fantastic collection of prints and drawings of vases, as well as actual vases. So maybe you and her can talk.
Oh, yeah, great. Oh, Mia, yes, thanks, I will.
Absolutely. And then a final question for the audience, but I think a very important one. Is there a catalogue? Where can we find the catalogue?
Yes.
We'd love to hear more information about this.
There it is. There is a catalogue, and it's available at the OPW, at the publications at opw.ie. Yes, it is a smallish, but full of information, and from all the artists, there is a work in it.
Fantastic. Well, I think we're sort of, yes, 5 to 7. Perfect timing, everyone. Brilliant. Thank you all so much for sharing the exhibition, but also sharing, you know, the challenges and the difficulties of commissioning and working on these types of new commissions in a response to such a well-known artist that I think has really shown just what each of you can do and the similarities that have come through in the works that you've produced. But ultimately, they're really unique moments, really thinking about Piranesi. And Hélène, thank you so much for sharing with us all your exhibition and the rationale behind it. You've got 1 week left to see it, if you'd like to.
I'm going tomorrow, so I can indulge myself for a whole week every day.
Absolutely, and if not, do have a look for the catalogue online. And I think that's it from us. Please take care, everyone, and you can keep an eye out on FPS. We've got our newsletter coming up soon, which will be sent out to all members, and we'll be telling you about our upcoming events over the next year or so. It's wonderful to be back, though, with our ceramics living room lectures. So just finally, a huge thank you to Amy, Kate, Matt, and especially Hélène, and have a good evening, everyone, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.